Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. My name is Maddie, Kendra Nilsson, COO, and today you're going to be listening to episode 188, The Courage to Heal, Navigating Trauma Recovery as a Spouse and Parent. We hope that you feel edified and validated this episode.
Sometimes something happens that feels so pivotal, and this episode is one of those moments. If you haven't listened to my episode with Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, that is episode 171 on December 5th. I encourage you to go back and listen to it. But this happened right before that episode and was about sexual trauma. But this episode today goes deeper into that backstory in incredibly vulnerable ways. And I've really debated sharing this because really this is an audio journal entry I never intended to share. It was simply for processing. But when it was finished, I realized that so many people feel this way, but don't have the words to explain it. So I am leaning in to that discomfort of sharing a very personal experience in hopes that it will help you. It takes courage to share something like this. I hope that this helps you understand yourself or a loved one better so that you can take that healing journey to the next level. I hope you enjoy it, my friends. And if you haven't yet, go back and listen to Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife's episode number 171 after you listen to this. I'm about to have an interview with Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. I need to journal about this because I'm having a very difficult time formulating my thoughts because of the dissociation that happens when I think or talk about my abuse or about intimacy issues related to that. I wanted to be intimate with Joel. It had been about a week. It was a Sunday morning or something like that. And I was excited to be with him. And I did not communicate that, and I typically don't. I try to a little bit, but I'm doing it more than I think that I'm doing it. I thought he was well aware that it was around the time for us to be intimate, because often we will be intimate on Sunday. Instead, he came to me and he said, I just want to talk to you about something. He said, I just want you to listen, like really trying to be gentle about it. But he said, I just feel like you don't pursue me and that you're not interested in being intimate, not interested in connecting like that, and that I'm doing all the work. I was shockingly defensive. Even for myself, I felt very defensive and upset in ways I didn't understand. He responded well and helped with differentiation. He was able to let go. And he just let me sit in my feelings for a little bit. It actually took me a day and a half, I think, where I felt very hurt. And I wanted to punish him without really necessarily thinking that's what I was doing. But I wanted him to hurt like I was hurting. I was hurt because he misunderstood me, but I didn't even understand what was going on. I didn't know why I was having such a physical response that was painful. I couldn't allow myself to go there. I kept feeling confused, discouraged, and reactive. I really tried to get curious instead of shaming myself and shutting down. I allowed space to think about it and to not jump right into an apology that wasn't heartfelt, but to explore it a little bit more. About 2 days later, I said, I know this is something we need to talk about. I know I've been distant and I don't understand it myself. It's very difficult for me to talk about. Everything in me is screaming to roll over and look the other way and just go to sleep. It's so hard for me to talk about, and I have no idea why it is so triggering. I feel so sensitive. I just processed as I talked. I really was trying to get there earlier, but I felt too scary. Whereas when we're in other arguments or things like that, it's not a problem for me to process, to journal about, to talk about. But this felt so big. Thinking back, it still feels very raw and triggering. Something struck a chord. I felt powerless, misunderstood, and it hurt. It hurt so much. And it wasn't even how he approached it. It was what he said, but more just that I could be completely misunderstood by somebody that I cared so much about something that was so vulnerable to me. And I can talk about sex just fine. But there's layers of trauma that I realized what it was. And it explained that it felt impossible to give him any more. I feel like in the last 20 years of marriage, I've not always, if I'm being completely honest, but I haven't really leaned in sometimes when it comes to intimacy. There's been complacency. I've tried to challenge myself, lean into discomfort, challenge misconceptions, and remind myself that I'm in a safe space and learn and grow and heal so that it doesn't affect my intimate life. And I felt like I had made a lot of progress in a lot of ways. I have a good sex life as far as I can tell. But I think I'll hit a deep rooted fear that I'm not enough. And honestly, maybe I never will be for my spouse. And maybe I'll never completely heal. This is a fixed mindset. There isn't room for growth in those things. There's something so raw, so primal in those fears. I was reminded of past times and how much of our marriage, especially the first 10 years, I was dissociating when we were intimate. I looked that up to remind me of the different things that meant. And what it looks like for me is I feel often like a little bit disconnected from my body. Not like they might show in the movies, but I feel far away, almost like I'm in a tunnel. Sometimes it's a little bit less. My mind wanders a lot. I struggle to form thoughts together. They're super detached. It's hard for me to have a conversation to express myself because of that racing heart rate, shaking, nervousness, this terrified child. I don't even have control over that. It feels beyond rational thought. Even as I was talking to him, it helped to not look him in the eye and just lay there and try to explain it. And he was very patient and he allowed me to talk. But it was truly shocking to me how scared I felt and how alone I felt and triggered, so triggered. I felt confused why it was so hard to form thoughts, why it was so hard to express myself when I'm a counselor and this is what I do. And I've had a lot of trauma therapy. I've done a lot of work to heal my wounds. I always go back to that analogy of an onion. Through the years of therapy and trauma therapy, I peeled back those layers of onion. And it doesn't mean that onion is now gone. It just means that I've done a lot of that outside work, that big stuff, and it is getting much smaller every time. And yet there are still those layers that I don't even see. Sometimes because those layers are so thin or small that I don't want to say small because they're actually quite big in their own way too, just so deep, right? But they surprise you when they come out. It reminds me of how people talk about grief, how it comes in waves. This is complicated grief in its own way. There's mourning that comes from lost innocence, but that's not quite right because I wasn't raped. And for a long time, like a lot of my clients do, they're like, well, if it's not rape, then it doesn't matter or it doesn't count. It's not like invalidating our experience. Well, I often have flashbacks during intimacy, and I always thought of them from the movies, like intense graphic flashbacks, but it's more of just like this memory snapshot that keeps rewinding in my brain. I have to keep telling myself, it's safe, it's fine, that's not happening. Joel's a safe person. This is okay. You're all right. It's going to be fine. And just like coaching myself through things so that I can stay present. But I didn't even really realize what I was doing. It's just some memories are always there with me, and some of them are stronger than others. One when I was a lot younger. There's one after my dad died. The combined grief with my dad's tragic death and his disappearance for a while before they found his body, that just makes it that much more intense. Those images come up, but the ones that I discounted for so long still came up, but I didn't notice them as much or put too much thought into it. It's just a thing that has always been there for so long when it comes to any sort of intimate moments, whether physical or emotional. In high school and college, times when I was victimized, I felt powerless. Situations where I was taken advantage of, or I was almost potentially raped, or just in a very compromising situation. And the message that I was left with is that I'm not safe and that men only want one thing from me and I don't have a voice. They will mistreat me because they want one thing. There were situations sometimes where I had best friends This one guy in particular went through all of us trying to sleep with us just for that conquest and would brag about it to people, and I didn't know until later. But it deeply manipulated me into believing he cared, and it was a game to him. I really fell for him. It was devastating that I was just a pawn in this game. And that was just one small experience. You might have had similar things that feel the same way, but wasn't rape, and it's hard to count it. And yet it's another tally, if you will, that reinforces that belief. There's lies that we tell ourselves. I'm not enough, that I'm damaged, that men are not safe, that intimacy is not safe. Lies keep repeating in my mind, even though I don't realize I'm repeating them. There's another experience where I was a freshman and there was a senior. He wanted me to help him pick out a tux for prom, and he said his girlfriend couldn't go, so he just told me to come over and we'd drive together. I went there and nobody was home, and I had this terrible feeling before I left, so I decided to bring a friend. And I won't go into the details of all of it because it's sad and distressing, but he very much designed that so he could take advantage of me and blackmail me. Those experiences fill me with sadness. I think about trauma therapy and how I explained it years ago. It's like this scream is inside of me trying to get out, or this sob that feels stuck in my chest. And I think that's what's coming out when I feel triggered about intimacy, is the same heartbreak, that heartache of feeling betrayed, of feeling unsafe, taken advantage of, how somebody could betray you in such a heartbreaking way. Something I would never do to somebody in such a vulnerable situation. And yet, so many people did in those very scary and frightening ways. There's another person that manipulated me by convincing me he wanted to know about my church, my beliefs. I was dating somebody at the time. I cleared it with him. Are you okay if I go talk to this guy? He wasn't too keen on it, but I did end up going. This guy should have been a big, obvious red flag. He just got out of prison and invited me boating to talk about it. I wanted it like that so I wouldn't be alone with him. There are other people going. Same situation. He was very aggressive on that boat. You could see in his eyes he enjoyed making me uncomfortable. He kept pursuing me. He kept touching me. Not going too far here, but he kept touching my upper thigh, especially when he realized I was very uncomfortable. He would smile after, and I would get scared. He would want to do it more because of that fear it instilled in me. He liked the challenge and the power he had over me. It was very difficult to get out. The only way that I was able to was, I won't go into that, but those situations were quite miraculous. I escaped, but I wasn't unscathed. I still bear those scars. I tell you this right now because it could help you. And I never in a million years would think I'm going to publicly talk about how terrible all of this is. And yet I know it's going to help somebody. So I'm willing to be very vulnerable publicly in ways I am not overly comfortable with, that are very vulnerable and revealing. But I know there's a lot of people out there, especially women, that have felt that their experiences don't qualify them for being so triggered and traumatized, that it wasn't rape, that it wasn't anything super terrible, that they really did manage to get through it pretty well. They had boyfriends, they had relationships, they're married, all of these things. And yet they still don't understand why it's so hard to maybe climax, or to, like in my case, it was 10 years before I was able to relax enough in an intimate setting to enjoy it. Parts were enjoyable, but mentally it was hard to let go. I know from listening to my clients that a lot of people have those same experiences. It's really difficult even still to talk about. You might be thinking hers were actually bad and valid, but mine are not. We minimize so we don't have to face it. I call it getting squirrely, or I squirreled. That's when you distract yourself, when you're buoyed. I do that all the time, even thinking about it. I notice my gaze is so slippery. I usually have great eye contact. But when I'm talking about this sexual trauma and intimacy, and how it affects my relationship, and how the consequence of that is that I have been misunderstood as not caring, being indifferent, not wanting intimacy, or being a lazy lover, or something like that. And I don't blame my spouse. I understand why he would draw those conclusions because it does manifest as being indifferent. Over time, I've recognized that's not the case. I just don't know how to communicate that I want to connect, but I don't know how to do it in ways that are not triggering. Certain locations, positions, requests are very difficult for me because they are so much more closely related to a certain memory that it is much more difficult for me to not dissociate. I feel a little bit disconnected from my body. I feel my mind wandering a lot and daydreaming. I feel emotionally detached. I feel difficulty connecting with my husband, almost like we're not in the same room because I'm in my head so much. It's hard to be in the present moment. There is this feeling of zoning out. Very difficult. I never understood what all that meant. It's hard to stay present. It's hard to climax. It's difficult to communicate or express those emotions. And when you are triggered, it is almost impossible because maybe it is impossible because I guess I'm talking about fight, flight, or freeze. There is no cognitive functioning that's productive. I was shocked by how intense this response was this last time for something relatively minor could just be a normal conversation and has been in the past. But for whatever reason, this time it was just my mind and body telling me it's time to work through another layer and it's time to maybe help other people with the same thing. But for whatever reason, feeling so triggered, and we all have different triggers, or it might be something else that triggers you. My counsel would be to get curious and give yourself space and don't rely on your spouse to give you reassurance. I can't even inform my thoughts about this even still. It's like my brain wants to go to self preservation. It's so hard to put them together. Recall is almost impossible. My brain so badly wants to preserve itself and not allow me to remember those things. Not that these memories are gone. I can tell you what happened, but my ability to think in those memories or triggers was impossible. So again, if you're thinking about fight, flight, and freeze here, I did feel very much like a deer in headlights. I think about feeling so triggered, feeling like that deer in headlights. I was very reactive. I reverted to my child self or even my teenage self. That makes sense, right? That was when the trauma happened as a teenager and as a young child. So both parts of me, those victim selves, were coming out in full force with that rage, that anger, and they were struggling to think. They were very reactive, very defensive. They were feeling the injustice of that accusation that I didn't care or that I didn't want to connect, that I wasn't interested in being there for him when I felt like that was all I was doing, digging in so hard just to be present, leaning in a little bit more each week, each month, each year, instead of running like everything in me told me to, saying that intimacy is not safe, that essentially I'm just a prostitute. I'm there to meet somebody else's need, regardless of what I want or need. And I could never be the kind of person my spouse needs. I could never pursue him in the way he wanted. Like, I think about how shows or movies might portray a very assertive woman sexually pursuing a man and being almost aggressive in her pursuit and how that can be a turn on. I cannot imagine doing that. It seems beyond where I am on my healing journey. I have got to the part where I can jokingly talk about it or just very conversationally, but to be very vulnerable with lust or showing that sexual desire, it feels impossible. That feels too beyond what I am capable of doing. Now, as a therapist, I am willing to challenge those beliefs, and I do every day. There are moments when I can quiet those trauma voices inside of me more effectively. But if I am not, they are so loud. It takes everything to move forward. I say this from experiences that are not rape. In many ways, very common experiences, betrayal, being used and manipulated, feeling powerless, reinforce these lies, these beliefs that the world is not safe, that intimacy is not safe. These are always lies. This is true sometimes, but it's definitely not true all the time. And it reinforces that belief that it is true all the time. I've been married for about 20 years, and I know my husband is a safe person. He is loving and would never hurt me like that. Now, if you're on the other side and your spouse has been betrayed and your spouse is the one that has had sexual trauma, I want to tell you what my husband did that was effective. When I told him I needed to talk, he responded gently. We were in an environment where neither of us were defensive, especially him. I was feeling threadbare. He was curious and gentle, and he didn't butt in trying to fix it. He just listened. When I was completely done, he didn't interrupt because it was obvious I was processing. Occasionally, he'd ask for clarification, but mostly he listened. I wept and explained my frustration and confusion, why my brain wasn't working to explain what was happening. I did not have the words. And I think part of that is because when I was a victim, I didn't have the understanding or words as a young child and then as a teen. In moments of trauma, I didn't have the words, and it was hard to put words to them now, thinking back on those memories. Again, I say this as a therapist that has had extensive training and that has gone through extensive therapy myself. It makes sense that you don't have the words. It's hard to string thoughts together and communicate with your spouse why it's difficult to be intimate in the way that maybe they wanted or hoped for, as far as maybe having a really assertive lover or somebody that can respond sexually in a way that they want. When, to me, some of those ways feel very hard to do. They feel almost impossible because my brain goes so quickly to feeling like I told you before. But it's not the right words. It's like I don't have the right words. The closest I can get is I feel like a prostitute there to meet a need and that I am powerless and that I will be mistreated or that my voice doesn't matter, my opinion doesn't matter. And those are very difficult to challenge. Now, they're not impossible. These voices have gotten a lot quieter over the years. And that mostly comes from continuing to explore that with my spouse, to do that with a therapist. One way that trauma has shown up in ways I didn't expect is that if I ever feel pressured or pushed, even minimally, even in a way that my husband won't see as pressure, but I'll internalize it that way. When I feel that pressure, I really have to dig deep to prevent myself from shutting down and dissociating. Even gentle, fair requests in an intimate setting can feel very uncomfortable to me. And it's easiest to go to avoidance and indifference rather than that vulnerability and that engagement. And maybe it's like that for you as well. Journal about it, do audio recordings about it, because every time I do something like that, I'm peeling back another layer. Maybe the onion, you're just getting like that tiny onion skin layer. You're not even getting like the full thick layer, but it is a layer nonetheless. And it will come. Sometimes it's hard for me to even believe that I can arrive at the end of this like a very bold, assertive, playful, and I don't even know all the words even now. The type of spouse that can love intimacy without overthinking it, without it being complicated, and talk about it, meet each other's needs in ways that don't feel triggering. I know that's possible, and yet my brain doesn't want to believe it. Then I remember how far I've come since we've been married. It is amazing, and I can't discount that. And I think if we focus on that, that is a journey to healing, and that there will be periods of rapid growth, and then there'll be a long time where not much is happening, maybe, and then something will trigger it, and you'll feel like you're set back a little bit. My advice to you is just to get curious and give yourself space for that and above all, communicate and process that with your spouse, with a trusted somebody, hopefully a therapist, somebody that can handle that well. And please do that with somebody that is safe. If it's not a healthy therapist, and there are many of them out there, do not do that. With your spouse, please share with them beforehand. This is very scary to me. It's very triggering. It's really hard to even put my thoughts together because of the complicated grief that is involved in it. So I really need you to just listen, not try to fix. When it's done, if I feel up for it, I just want you to hold me. I don't want you to make it about you, even though there's elements of you that are connected because it is our intimacy, our love life. There are natural consequences of trauma and it affects our marriage and intimacy. I just want you to have an open mind and heart. This is difficult in a way you probably won't understand, maybe ever, to the degree that I can. And I may not even be able to put it in words you can understand. It's difficult because I want to connect and improve our love life, but I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know how to do that all the time. It's this fine and delicate balance between helping meet each other's needs and this sense of self-betrayal I feel when I don't protect myself, when I stay silent, when I'm intimate, when I do these things. It feels like everything in me is just telling me to run, to shut down, to dissociate, to not rely on others, not be vulnerable, not open up to possible betrayal and heartache again. Your body and your mind are just trying to protect you, even when it doesn't serve you anymore, even when it doesn't make sense and you've been safe for maybe decades. It is so difficult, and I want you to know you're not alone. There are so many people that struggle with this. It's complex. It's heartbreaking. A lot of times you just think, okay, the worst is over. It's not that bad. I'm fine. Then your spouse will say or do something, or something else will set it off, and you will feel like a weeping child and you'll want to act out. I wanted to punish my husband. I wanted to blame him. I wanted to be defensive. I wanted to sit in that victimhood. But it's hard to not want to stay stuck as a victim. Instead of move forward and challenge those lies you're telling yourself. I don't even know if lies is the right word, because they're beliefs that are there for a reason. But challenge those beliefs that don't serve you. I recognize this is a tall order, and this is something you've been carrying for a long time that likely you don't even really understand yourself because your brain keeps trying to shut it down because it's unpleasant, and that's how it's dealt with it in the past, and that's worked so far. But it's not optimal living. It's not true fulfillment. It's not true joy and happiness. And you and your family will never be their best selves unless you face your demons. And it's not easy. So this episode was going to be about doing an audio journal. Halfway through, I decided to change it to a podcast episode because I realized this would help other people. This podcast episode is not at all going to be about giving you false hope that this is going to be a quick fix and that this is not going to be hard. Because it is hard and it's not a quick fix. There's hope. It comes down to communication, leaning in, and not staying stuck in victimhood, over identifying with trauma, saying, I can't help it. I was just abused, or I've just had trauma. There's nothing I can do about it. This is just how it was, and it's so deep rooted and it's hard. I don't know how to change. If we stay stuck there, that's not fair to anybody. And we can challenge ourselves even just a little bit. And I've been doing that all throughout our marriage without understanding how I was doing it. And I think you have to. Maybe if you try, you can put those things to words and help your husband understand or your spouse understand how you have challenged those beliefs, how you have leaned in, how you have shown up, even if it doesn't look like it, because you've had to get really good at masking your feelings and how much that has hurt you, protecting yourself from that pain. I'm going to leave it at that for today. It's hard, but please just end with that belief. There is hope. But it will take time, my friends. You were made to do hard things. You are equipped with what you need to take that first step towards healing. Take that step. I promise you, your family will thank you for it. Until next time, my friends. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.